what on earth is going on in Texas. It's kind of a complicated story, but it's also a really big story. So I'm going to walk you through it. Let me start here with what's been happening in Texas. So if you remember, Donald Trump is very concerned about the 2026 elections and, of course, 2028, but especially 2026, because if you think about the way the House of Representatives is currently set up, the Republicans are in control of it, but only by a razor thin majority. And a lot of that is because of previous gerrymandering that gave the Republicans an advantage over the Democrats. So going into the 2026 election, even with those advantages, Trump and other Republicans are very concerned that they're going to lose control over the House of Representatives because Trump's approval ratings are in the dirt. Let's put it that way. Let me see. I looked at them last night. I think he's got 61% of Americans think he's done a bad job in office, and 38%, I think, off the top of my head, maybe 39%, maybe 37%, somewhere in there, approve of what he's doing. That's not a good thing for a president who almost always takes hits in a midterm election anyway, for a number of reasons. So Trump is trying to find extra seats anywhere he possibly can. And the first place to which he turned was to Texas, because Texas has a supermajority in or very strong majority of Republicans in the legislature. And it has a very staunch Republican governor who sort of is Trump light, if you will. And, he's at the state level. And so Trump went to the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, a Republican, and asked him to call a special session of the Texas legislature to redistrict the state in order to find 5 more seats. That is, cut up the state in such a way that 5 Democrats would lose their seats and Republicans would pick those seats up this year, before the 2026 election. Now, that is not unprecedented. Texas did it before in an attempt to grab power, but it's really almost never done because the states redistrict after every census, and the censuses are taken on the zero numbered years. So every decade, we had one in 2020, we'll have one in 2030, we'll have one in 2040, and so on. So the redistricting takes place in the year after that, or the 2 years after that, depending on how quickly the state legislature gets going. And that's why the 2010 elections were such a huge deal, because the Republicans launched something called Operation Red Map that enabled them to take over control of state houses. Lots of people don't pay attention to state house races, pay attention, to take over the state houses and then to gerrymander those maps. That is, either pack their opponents into really limited districts so the voting power of their opponents was diluted, or crack those populations. It's called cracking and packing, or packing and cracking. That diluted them so that they couldn't win actual seats in states like North Carolina, Ohio, Kansas, Michigan, Wisconsin. There were a whole bunch of them in 2010. Now, some of those states have been recovered for fair maps and fair districting, as Michigan has been, and that's a process that's ongoing. So anyway, Trump asked Abbott to call the legislature into special session to redo the maps in this 5th year into that process. Again, very, very unusual. But the Democrats, who recognize this as an extraordinary power grab, and this is in the House in Texas, the Democrats in the House recognize that this was, just a naked power grab. Texas is already gerrymandered, by the way. And 51 of them left Texas for Illinois especially, but also for New York and Massachusetts. And they did that to deprive the Republicans of what's called a quorum. And a quorum is the minimum number of people you need to have present in order to conduct business. That is, a legislature, 2 people in the legislature can't get together and say, hey, we're the legislature, we're going to pass laws. There are laws about the minimum number of people you have to have in order to conduct business. So by leaving the state, those Democrats made it so that the Republicans couldn't pass these gerrymandered maps. They stayed out of the state until the first session, special session, expired. It was for a limited amount of time. Abbott called one instantly again, and they can't stay out of the state forever. The legislature is very much a part-time job. They all have lives. So they came back yesterday. They flew back in yesterday. And once they're back, they will provide the quorum that the Republicans need to smash through these maps, and they will get the extra 5 seats if those things pass, which it certainly looks like they will. But what they didn't foresee is that when they got home, the Republican Speaker of the House, a man named Dustin Burrows, insisted that they sign what they're calling derogatorily a permission slip. They signed a piece of paper that committed them to showing up for the votes to enable the Republicans to push through these maps. And part of that was that they would have state troopers surrounding them, that they would have guards on them as they went about their daily business to guarantee that they would show up to vote in the House of Representatives for these. They don't have to vote for the maps, but they have to be present so the Republicans can force the maps through. They also had to agree to this until the final vote on the measure, which I think is going to be in about 3 weeks. I can't remember that off the top of my head. So a number of them did that, but one woman who represents a majority-minority district in Fort Worth, a woman named Nicole Collier, refused. She said, I think I have a quote from her here. She said, "I refuse to sign. I will not agree to be in custody. I'm not a criminal. I'm exercising my right to resist and oppose the decisions of our government. So this is my form of protest." She went on to say, "My constituents sent me to Austin to protect their voices and rights. I refuse to sign away my dignity as a duly elected representative just so Republicans can control my movements and monitor me with police escorts." She also pointed out that anybody who was escorting these 51 Democratic lawmakers wasn't actually on the beat doing their jobs. And she said, I hope you all feel safe with the Republicans doing that with your police officers. But when that happened, the Republican leadership forbade her from leaving the Capitol. So she was stuck in the Capitol under punishment, under threat of arrest, that if she stepped out of the Capitol, they would arrest her. Whether or not they locked the doors is not yet clear to me. So she spent the night in the Capitol, in the chamber last night, and when protesters showed up to chant "Let her go," just troopers arrested them. Lots of protests there. But this morning, I think it was, or maybe this afternoon, morning her time, she filed a writ of habeas corpus, saying that they're imprisoning me without, unjustly, and I want to be released from the Capitol building. So that's the specifics of what happened. But the larger picture of what happened is that the Republican leadership, it's really important to remember in this case that this is not just about Texas, and it's not just about the Texas legislature. Having the Democrats there is the only way that the Republicans can hammer through this 5-seat power grab. And that 5-seat power grab is, they believe, imperative to them holding the House of Representatives in 2017. 2026 after the 2027 after the 2026 elections. I'm sorry, I swim in years, and so I lose track of where we are. Just the way my brain works. Sorry about that. But so the attack on Representative Collier and the imprisonment of her to force her to do the will of the Republicans, not only at the state level, but also at the national level, so that they can hold power, even though it is very clear that the American people have soured on this administration and quite likely will vote against it or will want to vote against it in the midterms is an attack on all of the rights of all Americans. They are essentially imprisoning her to force her to rubber stamp a one-party state, to rubber stamp authoritarianism. It's a really big deal. Hey, Danny. There's only 5 of us here. That's a nice intimate group. Oh, wait, now we're up to 200. Hi, folks. I only have a really short time now because I'm off to something else. Publicizing a book is a ton of work, not least because at least I try to have a lot of content in what I say, and I try to have something new every time I talk. And it's not that that's hard. There's plenty of history that I would like to talk about more than I get a chance to, so it's a great opportunity, but it does make your mind really, really keep on things. And time changes are not good for me, in case you hadn't noticed. All right, so I'm going to quickly get going here. And I want to say that this is going to be a little bit different today, not only because it's only going to be a half an hour before I run off, but second, because usually I'm pretty clear about what I think is going on. And as I am watching what's happening in the House of Representatives today, I don't know what's going on. That is, I can tell you what people are doing, but that's far less an interesting question than why they are doing it. And I've actually been sitting here in the hotel room for the last couple of hours, pulling threads and trying to see if I could make more sense out of why people are behaving the way they are. And I have some guesses, but I make no promise at all that they're right. They're just some things to think about. And on the news of things to think about, there's some things I want to front load today. And one of them is something that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said, I don't even know when. I'm sorry, I've totally lost track of time. But recently, over the impeachment hearing into whether there should be an impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden. And what she said is something that I have said to you repeatedly, and it really bears keeping in the front of your mind. And that is, unless somebody is speaking under oath, they do not have to tell the truth. And it has been a hallmark on the side of the Republican Party for a long time now, but really taking off since Donald Trump won the presidency, where they simply make stuff up. They simply invent stuff. And as you know, this frustrates me to absolutely no end, because I get spin, everybody does spin, and that's useful actually in a lot of ways, but this is lies. And so, people write to me all the time saying, what about this? I just heard this, what about this? At this point, if it is a Republican saying it, I think you have to start from assuming it's a lie and then chasing down what truth there may be in it. But I am just no longer jumping to attention. And I really liked that she said the same thing. Pay attention to the people who are speaking under oath. Because they're a really different kettle of fish than when they are speaking not under oath. So, for example, Bernie Kerik, who worked with Rudy Giuliani to try and overturn the results of the 2020 election, had plenty of things to say in front of the cameras, but now that he is supposed to be testifying in court, has said he will not do so without being granted immunity. Well, I assume his story is going to change. And similarly, you saw, for example, Rudy Giuliani out in front of the cameras all the time trying to look as if he was holding hearings. But when actually forced to testify in court, he admitted that he had defamed Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman. So again, keep that in mind. The other piece to keep in mind that I thought was great, somebody wrote it the other day, and it might have even been one of you writing on my Facebook page, and it may not have been too. I'm more than a little scattered. But somebody said, if you want to know I know who it was. No, it was in that same hearing. It was now I can't remember who it was, but it was one of the representatives in that same hearing. It was Summer Lee. I believe it was Representative Summer Lee in that same hearing, where she said, you can tell if something is bipartisan or nonpartisan if you switch the parties in it. So if you see something that's being put forward by one party or the other, and then you flip it and see if it would affect the country the same way if the parties were flipped, you can tell a lot about the goals of a piece of legislation. And I thought that was really, really helpful, because she was talking about the government shutdown, and how the prospective government shutdown, and how that would affect poor people, and said, if you switch the categories here, you will see that it really does affect one group of people much more strongly than it does another, and therefore you cannot think that this is nonpartisan. I just thought that was a really good construction to think about. All right, so let's now then, if those are the two things that it would be great for people to look for as they're looking at the news these days, what on earth is going on in the House of Representatives right now? And so the obvious thing to tell you is this. As you remember, when the Republicans took the House of Representatives after the 2022 elections, the Republicans had an extraordinarily slim majority. Off the top of my head, I don't remember if it was 4 seats or 5, but it was very, very slim. So what that meant was a couple of things, and this actually speaks to one of the reasons I have such a huge problem with gerrymandering, is that if in fact we had not had the gerrymandering in Ohio, Florida, and Alabama, not to mention in the other states, but in those 3 states, and I'm picking those 3 states because courts have found the gerrymanders that were in place in 2022 in those 3 states unconstitutional. So all of them have to be thrown out, although Alabama tried to ignore that, and Ohio still is ignoring it, I believe. Without those gerrymanders, the Democrats would almost certainly still hold the House of Representatives. So why does that matter? I mean, aside from who controls the House, it matters for the Republican Party, because what that means is if you have gerrymanders in place like that, you have incredibly safe districts. And those would be districts like the one that Jim Jordan from Ohio inhabits, and some of the other extremists as well. Because once you have a seat that is that safe, so Lauren Boebert, for example, who's from Colorado, is also in a gerrymandered district that was plus, I think it was 17 in favor of the Republicans. And she is so unpopular in that district that even despite that extraordinary leg up, she only won her seat in 2022 by, I think, about 500 votes, which is just a huge fall. But, if you're 17 points up, you got a real leg up. So the reason that matters is that once you have those extreme gerrymandered districts, you have people who don't need to do their jobs. They don't need to do anything except fundraise and push the party line, because they're not going to get challenged except perhaps from the right. So they tend to be extremists. Well, so the problem then, if you take that principle and you put it in the House, the problem is a very small group of extremists in that very small majority have managed to really hold the power over the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, who is a Republican from California. And McCarthy, by the way, none of the Republican caucus is conference. For some reason, it's the Democratic caucus and the Republican conference, and I have yet to find anybody who can explain to me why that is. But technically, it's called when you get all the Democrats together, it's called a caucus, and when you get all the Republicans together, it's called a conference. Who knows? I would love to know the answer to that, because that's the kind of crap I like. But anyway, So none of that conference is moderate any longer. They have stripped out all the moderates, and they're all extremists. They're extremists on abortion rights. They're extremists on immigration. They're extremists on religion. They're extremists on all of the major touch points in our society. But Kevin McCarthy is also, and a number of the Republicans are also deeply woven into the financial structure of the United States and want to keep the country stable enough that is stable. People like Chip Roy and of where Texas, and Andy Biggs of Arizona, and Gosar of Arizona, and Gates of Florida, off the top of my head, are much less concerned about promoting stability. They're more than happy to burn everything down, and that's an interesting question as to why. That's what's kept me up all afternoon. But so the problem is this very small group can basically make McCarthy do what they want it to do. And if you remember, he had to go through 15 votes in order to become Speaker of the House. And in exchange for becoming Speaker of the House, he had to agree to a change that would mean that one person alone could trigger a motion to vacate the chair. That is essentially a vote of no confidence. That is, they could force the House to vote on whether or not McCarthy would stay in office. So it's kind of a holding the whip hand over them, if you will. So what's happened here is that in order to get through the debt ceiling back in May, as I recall, I'm way better at the past than I'm at the present, can I just say? In that argument about the debt ceiling, the radical right, the extremists, wanted simply to refuse to raise the debt ceiling. And as I wrote at the time, as I will say again, I'm not sure people understand just how catastrophic that would have been, because the U.S. has never defaulted on its debt before, but the U.S. also underpins most of the world's financial systems. So the sheer crisis of that was unthinkable. And in a larger geopolitical framework, ripping the United States out from underpinning all the agreements that it has been part of since World War II would have given a free hand to the autocrats of the world, the Vladimir Putins especially, but also Saudi Arabia and China, places that would love to see the United States and the United States' guarantees ripped away. So that was just simply unthinkable. So what happened was that the president said, don't mess around with our debt ceiling. You just got to stop doing this. And I've talked about that so much, I'm not going to go into it more when I've got so little time. But finally, he and McCarthy agreed to raise the debt ceiling in exchange for not technically over the debt ceiling, but you can think of it that way, that when the budget came up, that the Democrats would agree to cuts across the board, and that was basically it, but to a floor level of spending. Well, as soon as that went through, a number of the extremists just went ballistic and said that they'd been betrayed and said that they were going to come after McCarthy. So since then, in the process of trying to get the budget in place, and this is so the debt ceiling is something totally different. It's the United States' ability to borrow. And I've talked about that before. I'm not going to go into it now. It's got to have a lot of time. But the budget is just, we got to pay the bills every year. We got to appropriate money for the upcoming year. And that budget, the calendar, the year stops, the fiscal year stops on September 30th and starts on October 1st. If there isn't a budget in place because of some rules changes that happened in the 1970s, ones that can be challenged, actually, I think at this point, and even the person who was responsible for them, the White House counsel was responsible for them, is on record saying he never intended for the budget negotiations to be this sword hanging over Congress and over the government. But because of those changes, if the government can't appropriate a budget, things are supposed to shut down. Not everything, but most of the things that Americans depend on. And I have to just say, for all the things you hear about, which are huge, one of the places this always hits home for me, an academic, is my colleagues on the science side who spend, literally years of their lives preparing experiments. And if they are government funded and they come to fruition during that period, they're not supposed to work on them. They're not allowed to work on them. And I have seen them literally in tears going, I spent 7 years putting this experiment together, and these people are pissing it away. And this is, I'll never get these years back. Anyway, that was an aside. But so, since, it's not like it's a surprise the government has to be funded. That's like government 101. But McCarthy has not been able to come up with an agreement with the extremists to fund the government because he had an agreement with Biden. I mean, they had an agreement. And the extremists just said, no, we're not going to do that. And McCarthy didn't have the votes to get a package through without them because he refuses to work with the Democrats, which is a policy that really began on the Republican side during the 1990s. It's known as the Hastert Rule, if you've wondered what that is, but it was really started under Newt Gingrich when he was Speaker of the House. And that was not that, as it had always been in the past, the Speaker is going to bring a measure forward and try and get it through with a majority of votes from both sides or whoever is there. Instead, it said the Speaker would bring stuff forward only if it could get a majority of the Republicans. So that cuts off anything like immigration law, for example, that the Senate passed when John Boehner was Speaker of the House, and he wouldn't bring it up in the House because he knew it would pass if the Democrats were able to vote on it, but not enough Republicans liked it. So what that rule has done is it has had the effect of dramatically moving legislation to the right when the Republicans hold the House of Representatives. So, for example, we have seen in this House of Representatives just a slew of far-right legislation that makes the extremists really happy, but that could never make it past the Democrats and can't make it through either the Senate, which is dominated by Democrats, or the president. So the extremists kept saying to McCarthy, we don't care what you agreed to, because we're not going to agree to it. We're going to make these draconian cuts. So they were asking, for example, for cuts of 30% to the domestic spending. This is that because there were some things excluded, they asked for a cut across the board of 8%, but that wouldn't include veterans benefits and something else, Medicare maybe, and that meant it was 30% on everything else. I mean, the math is all out there, but it doesn't really matter for this discussion. Anyway, so McCarthy couldn't get any of these bills through. He couldn't. I mean, he got one through, and they put through a number of they divided the appropriations into 12 bills, and then they loaded them with what are called poison pills. And poison pills are pieces of legislation that is completely unacceptable, not negotiable, but completely unacceptable to the other side. So, for example, stripping out LGBTQ plus rights, or having strict, very severe anti-abortion things in these bills, which normally the appropriations bills are kept clean. They try never to load them up on both sides, simply because that's not the place for those fights. All right. So what happened, of course, was that there was this fight over shutting down the government. And in the process of that, the extremists just kept saying, nope, 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 we're not going to pass these. Nope, nope, nope. Finally, and it was quite a surprise, McCarthy forced onto the floor a measure that the Democrats took one look at, and it was clean, with two exceptions. It increased disaster funding for the United States, and it cut funding to Ukraine, and that's going to matter. I mean, it's going to matter in a lot of ways. It's going to matter to me in the next 9 minutes. And it passed, but it passed with all but one Democratic vote, and the one that didn't pass was a man in Illinois whose constituency is largely Ukrainian Americans. And a lot of Republicans also voted for it, but not the extremists, and it needed the Democratic votes to pass. So McCarthy did the unthinkable for the extremists. He worked with the Democrats to fund the government. Now, to you and me, that looks like, hello, that's the way it's supposed to work, but to them, this was an extraordinary betrayal. So Matt Gaetz, who is a representative from Florida and an extremist leader, I would not call him a leader otherwise, but he has made himself the leader of the extremists, has taken advantage of the rule that the extremists forced onto McCarthy when he became Speaker to try and vacate the chair. Okay, so that's where we are today, right? Let's be really clear about this. This has nothing to do with the Democrats. The Democrats are very well organized. They are working as a unit, even everywhere from the more extreme progressives through the more conservative Democrats. They are doing what leadership wants, unless, and this is crucial, unless leadership tells them it doesn't care. And that's always something there are times when a leader will say, do whatever works for you and your constituents. So far, that has not happened here, but I kind of wanted to throw that caveat out there. All right. What's happening is the Republicans are freaking melting down. And it's really interesting as a scholar, because this has been coming since, well, people associate it with the Tea Party, But it's really before that. I mean, it's been coming since Newt Gingrich took over the House in the 1990s and tried to throw away everybody who didn't agree with him. Now, he did, in fact, he and his successors managed to purge the party of traditional Republicans. But now we're so far to the right that a small group of people who are determined to basically to get their own way and shut down the government until they get everything they want on their far right agenda is turning against even the people in their party who share most of their values but actually see a value in the U.S. government. I mean, it's just absolutely fascinating. So earlier this morning, they did in fact make a motion to have a vote to vacate the chair, and in that it was what people were watching was, would the Democrats defend McCarthy? And they didn't. As a unit, they said, this is not our problem. And that was a really interesting moment, because McCarthy made no friends among the Democrats when, after the shutdown, when they saved his bacon, he came out on the Sunday talk shows and basically said this was all the Democrats' fault. And of course, it had nothing to do with the Democrats. It is entirely a Republican problem here. So all that being said, what's going to happen going forward? The Democrats have said they will not save McCarthy. Who knows? Because the vote is happening, I think, in 7 minutes. And it's going to be alphabetical, and I'm going to be in a car, so I'm not going to be able to watch it. So you guys have to watch it. But people are asking what's happening on the Republican side. Now, there's a lot of Republicans who were perfectly willing to moan and gripe about McCarthy not being far enough right for them, but they're sitting in really good committee chairs, like Jim Jordan, for example, like James Comer of Kentucky, Marjorie Taylor Greene, people that he gave positions to try and buy their support. Well, it's worked, because they know they wouldn't continue to have that support if somebody else goes into that speaker's chair. So who's siding with whom on the Republican side right now is just a complete mess. The other side that I'm finding really interesting is what is Gaetz up to? I mean, what is Matt Gaetz up to? That is, he is up there basically burning the place down. And this is, I think, the question. What is his end game? And one of the things, and I don't know, just to be honest, I do not know. This is what I am puzzling over today. I mean, there's any number of things you could say. He just wants to burn it all down is one thing to say. He just likes the attention. That's another thing that people have said about him, is that he loves having the cameras on him. You know, maybe he's fundraising, but for what? I mean, he is so loathed in the Republican conference now that basically they're going to try and throw him out. They'll keep George Santos, but they're looking to see if they can throw him out with an ethics investigation, which maybe they can. I mean, the ethics issue is out there about the underage girls and all that. But I'm going to go back. This is so weird, and I really could be wrong. Yeah, maybe he's trying to become Florida governor, because DeSantis is certainly falling apart. But I think there's a larger picture here. Of course, I always think there's a larger picture, and maybe there's not. Maybe they're all just weenies. But until there's a speaker in that speaker's chair, the House cannot do any business. And people have asked, does it have to be someone from the House? No, technically it doesn't. There's no rules for whether or not you could have somebody else from outside. And there's a very funny journalist online who has a name that's one letter off from Matt Gaetz, and who just has suffered now ever since Matt Gaetz rose. And he said, listen, enough of them are dumb enough that I could probably become Speaker of the House, which wouldn't be a bad thing, because he's very smart. He's Matt Gertz, not Matt Gaetz, and he's a very good follow on social media. But although technically that's not the case, it has never been done before that somebody has gotten a speaker from outside. So it worries me that, in fact, if they vote to vacate McCarthy from the speakership, now they have to put somebody else in. And it took 15 votes to get McCarthy. So who on earth can get that many votes again? It's entirely possible that McCarthy will run again. But he's going to have a really different deal with the Democrats, because he knows now he can't get the entire Republican conference. He's going to have to move to the Democrats. And if he does that, they're certainly not going to put up with the kind of crap he's been handing them, including this new attempt to really rewrite our immigration laws in order to put money behind Ukraine. I know it's all like a bunch of moving pieces. But if it takes a really long time, and bear with me here, the most important thing on the table right now for the next 45 days, aside from our funding, is funding Ukraine. And it's important to remember that only about 1% of our budget goes to foreign aid at all. And only about 5% of our our defense budget has gone to Ukraine. And part of that funding that funding has been, and this is a terrible thing to say when you think of the extraordinary destruction in Ukraine and the loss of lives and the war crimes and the torture and everything that Ukrainians are putting up with and fighting back against to reclaim their country. But for people who are saying that the United States should not be giving that money to Ukraine, and it's not money, by the way, it's aid in the form of weaponry and humanitarian aid. If they shouldn't be doing that, literally, there is nothing we have ever done that is more cost effective. That is, for about 5% of our defense budget, what had been our second primary geopolitical foe has been simply hamstrung. I mean, Russia's in terrible shape. And you can follow this in any number of places. I don't have time to tell you where to find it, but take my word for it. Russia, the sanctions and everything that's happening to Russia means Russia is not going to recover in our lifetimes. So if he can stop that by shutting down the U.S. Congress from being able to do any business, that badly hurts Ukraine. And people who support Donald Trump, like Matt Gaetz, hate Ukraine because Ukraine was not under Volodymyr Zelensky, because it was not willing to work with Trump to undermine Biden in 2019. That's what the whole first impeachment was about. I feel like I probably just lost everybody because I know I'm deep in the weeds. But it would certainly hurt Ukraine, and it would certainly help Vladimir Putin. And of course, we are coming up on another election. And in 2016 and 2020, we know that the Russians interfered to try and help Donald Trump. And I absolutely could be wrong. Probably am wrong. But I think it's a mistake in this moment not to be watching the interplay of Ukrainian funding. The fact that Donald Trump is pitching a nutty because of his fraud trial in New York City, where his finances are being shut down, finances that we know have been deeply tied to Russia. And this particular crisis in the House. So I don't have a lot. I really don't have a lot today. What I have mostly is questions, and I don't know how any of this is going to come out. I will say that I'll leave you on this. One of the things I did in trying to figure this out was to dig into what was our most contested speakership of the House, 1856, and it took 133 ballots for people to come up with voting behind Nathaniel Banks of Massachusetts. And that's an actually really interesting case, because Banks was he wasn't really a normal party figure in any number of ways, but he was elected to Congress as a know-nothing. That is, as part of the anti-immigrant party, but it's been pretty well established by historian Tyler Anbinder that what was really attractive for most voters was that the know-nothings were standing against the spread of enslavement, against the slave power. So after 133 ballots, everybody who hates each other over everything decides to put Banks in the speaker's chair, not because they like Banks, but because they hate the extremists so much on the other side. And that seems to me to be, if you're looking for a historical precedent, that's the best I got for you, because there's an awful lot of people in the U.S. Congress right now who disagree about absolutely everything, but what they can all agree on is that they hate Matt Gaetz. So, and the people who like him. And they're not helping the Republicans either on a national level as the face of the party. So we'll see. The vote's about to take place. I got to go hop in a car. Thank you for
there's another thing. Somebody mentioned Trump here. I mean, the other thing in the news, of course, is that a judge has just slapped Trump with a gag order because he's gone after a court clerk by name and put a picture on social media. Those are the front runners for the Republican Party. I mean, what we're seeing is the dramatic destruction of a political party, and its only parallel is the period in the 19th century when the Democratic Party similarly self-destructed, and that was actually reborn in really interesting ways, but on a completely different, a really interestingly different basis. So anyway, that's all I got. I'm sorry I don't have definitive answers, but I don't think anybody does right now. And I wish I could be a fly on the wall to watch this play out. Thank you for being here. I'll see a lot of you on the rest of this tour, and I will be back as soon as I can be. And I'm going to try and write tonight, although I'm booked from now until midnight my time, so that's not good. Anyway, thanks for being here. I'll talk to you later.
I'm going to start today with the issue that you all wanted to ask about, but I knew you were too shy to do it. And that is what happened 252 years ago tonight, and that is the Boston Tea Party. This is the anniversary of the Boston Tea Party, December 16th, 1773, when about 30 or more young men boarded 3 vessels in Boston Harbor, broke open about 350 chests of tea and threw them overboard in protest of the Parliament's insistence that it could tax Americans, that is, it could pass laws that affected the colonists in North America without their representation in Parliament. And that it's a really big day because it's in American history, because it's really what galvanizes the idea that people do have to stand up against the idea that the government can act without the approval of the people. Just saying. Okay. I'm kidding. Nobody asked about that, but it's big in my mind. I actually would very much like to post a letter about it tonight, but an awful lot of other stuff is going on, so I may not do that. All right. One of the things that happened this weekend that people didn't pay a lot of attention to, and that happened yesterday. I'm off. Today's Tuesday, not Monday. And that's that, of course, what took a lot of oxygen is what Roger Ailes, who was the producer at Fox News, the Fox News channel in the 1990s, and really packaged a lot of right-wing politicians, called the orchestra pit theory of politics. And that's the idea, as he said, that if you have 2 men on a stage and one says, I know how to solve the Middle East question, and the other one falls into the orchestra pit, it's the one who falls into the orchestra pit who's going to get all the attention. And you can see Trump doing this every time attention appears to be sliding away from him. He throws himself into the orchestra pit. And that happened yesterday with the tragic deaths of Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer Reiner, his wife, who were murdered in their home. The Trump's reaction to that was hideous, and it has actually caused a bit of a rift even in his MAGA supporters, because Rob Reiner was an avid protector of democracy. But even people who supported the president loved him for his many extraordinary movies. The Princess Bride, for example, A Few Good Men. You know them. I don't need to go through them all. But people were really horrified by Trump's reaction. And then he doubled down on it. And I want you to hold on to that thought just for a minute. I'm not going to belabor it. I think it's long past time for us to stop focusing on Trump and to recognize that everything he does is an attempt to distract us. And the more that we focus on him, the more he gets to call all the shots. But I do want to point out that his behavior yesterday, and for a long time now, but not just over the thing about the Reiners, but also about a speech he gave that was supposed to be about the holidays, and it turned into something about Peruvian vipers and snakes, and somehow his son was tangled up in it, and so on. What did somebody say to me? The boy ain't quite right. He is is his mental acuity has slipped to the point that it's not able to be covered up any longer. And I think what you're going to be seeing now going forward is a lot of scrambling among people who are in the administration or administration adjacent, both to grab as much power as they can, but also to try to get out from any repercussions of their behavior during the administration. So hold on to that thought that Trump's behavior is unacceptable. It is not just a person who is not like many of us, but also somebody who is no longer able to function in any meaningful way. Imagine hiring him to take care of your dog, for example. I think he probably wouldn't do it. I know I wouldn't. And that's of real concern when he is the president of the United States. But while that was going on, and hold that to one side, I do want to call attention to something that didn't get a lot of attention because of the outrage over what was happening yesterday and the sheer horror, of course, of the Reiner's murder. And that is that the U.S. military yesterday struck 3 more small boats. These were in the Eastern Pacific, killing 8 more people, which brings the number of people that the U.S. has killed to 95 at least. That's the number that they have provided. And once again, the administration has not given the public or Congress any convincing evidence that these people were, as they say, narco traffickers. Now, I'm going to break that down a little bit because it's important. So what the administration is, actually, I'm going to go back a little bit before I come back to that. One of the hallmarks of this administration is that it is obfuscating. It is throwing up smoke screens over everything that it's doing. So, it keeps getting dragged into court, but when it does get dragged into court, oh, they have the wrong lawyer, or oh, they don't know who was responsible for this, or oh, they can't really answer that, or this court doesn't have jurisdiction, or maybe something else is going on. And so there is this constant battle to pin down what is actually happening and who did it, which, by the way, is a classic hallmark of gaslighting. That is, we can't have this discussion because one half of the party is not willing to recognize even the basis of a discussion. So that's what the administration does anyway. But in the case of these attacks on the small boats, apparently coming from Venezuela, although at least one Colombian has been involved, the administration says that the U.S. is in armed conflict with gangs that are trafficking drugs. But again, there's a lot of obfuscation around it. So they are suggesting that what they are protecting the United States from is illicit fentanyl, claiming things, for example, like each boat could kill 25,000 people, which is just a wild fantasy, but suggests that what is on those boats is the terribly deadly illicit fentanyl. In fact, what came out today is the administration admitted that what may or may not be on those boats is cocaine. And it's cocaine that is being trafficked across Venezuela and then off to the east for traffic to Europe and to Africa. These are not drugs shipments that are destined to the United States for the most part, even if there are drugs on those ships. So the administration is saying that the U.S. is in armed conflict with the drug traffickers, but, and this is so messy because it's intended to be messy, but they are also saying that they do not have to get the permission of Congress to continue the strikes, which under the 1973 War Powers Act, they do. The president can act without the oversight of Congress for 60 days, and then I think it's 60. It might be 90. September, October, November. It might be 90. I have a problem with 6s and 9s, but they can act with impunity for a certain period of time, and then they must ask Congress for approval to continue those strikes. Now, when the strikes began on September 2nd, on that September 4th, the administration went to Congress and said, we are telling you this happened in order to keep you apprised, as we must under the 1973 War Powers Act. But then when it came time to get permission, they said, no, we don't actually need your permission to do that because we're not actually at war. But by the same token, they're saying they can kill the people on those boats because we're in armed conflict. And, this came out today when somebody pointed out that, in fact, drug trafficking in the United States is not a crime that is punishable by death. And what the administration says is, yes, but we're at war with those people. So that means you can kill them. Which is, the legal observers are like, this is such a no-go, we can't even begin to tell you. And then there is, in addition to that, the strike of September 2nd, which was there was a first strike that hit a small boat that had 11 people on it, killed 9 of them, 2 people were survivors. 41 minutes later, they hit that boat again. And virtually every legal analyst that I have seen has said that is either murder, in case if we're not at war, or it is a war crime if we are at war. And this has been very much sort of lighting a fire under even Republicans in Congress because the administration is refusing to release the extended, the uncut video of that second strike. So today, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, and by the way, it is the Secretary of Defense until Congress changes it, although we've spent up to $2 billion changing the word defense to war around the world. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and Secretary of State Marco Rubio gave briefings to the House and the Senate in which both senators and House members on the Democratic side and some Republicans said, you didn't tell us anything here about why you think this is legal. We are still not convinced. And again, Hegseth and Rubio did not show Congress members the full video of the second. There were 4 strikes on September 2nd. One hit the boat the first time, one hit the flotsam with the people on it, and 2 more then to destroy the debris from the water, allegedly so that it would not become a navigation hazard. But these were really quite small boats, and it's quite a big ocean. So you can draw your own conclusions about why they felt it was imperative to get rid of the debris from those strikes. So the administration has said now that they will show the full video to the House and Senate Armed Services Committee tomorrow. We'll see. But the fact that they are refusing to show that video at the same time that they are continuing to kill people, allegedly for drug trafficking in such a way that it hurts the United States, is truly problematic. And, one of the things about it is, it is getting attention. It's getting a lot of attention, but it is essentially a situation where the administration, whether it's Pete Hegseth doing this or Donald Trump or both, is declaring that it has the power to kill people by simply saying you're an enemy. And therefore, that I don't have to give a reason. I don't have to talk to Congress about whether I'm at war. I simply get to be the lawmaker, and then the police officer, and then the judge, and then the jury, and the executioner. And that's a really big deal. And it's a really big deal now that I think about it. On a day when people who lived in what became the United States of America said, you cannot make rules over our lives without including us in them. And the government, not the government, the administration is flouting those rules, flouting the 1973 War Powers Act. So that happened, and I wanted to call it out because it's really important. And it is, people are focusing on that second strike as being a war crime or whatever. But I'm sorry, Jan, I seem to have highlighted you. I don't know how or why. But it's not just that second strike on September 2nd. The entire operation is shrouded in mystery, and it is deeply, deeply problematic. Okay, so that's one of the things that not a lot of people asked about, but that seemed really important. Now, what's going on with that? Those two things I just identified. First of all, the president is not in good shape. He is losing whatever control he ever had over himself and over his administration. And you appear to have people like Defense Secretary Hegseth doing a lot of stuff that is iffy. And I would include Stephen Miller, the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, in that category of people who are operating without as much oversight as people in the Oval Office normally would have. And he's the person who's in charge of the deportation sweeps and the sheer cruelty toward undocumented immigrants, and also other people who are swept up. And he is also working apparently in tandem with Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, who's working with Corey Lewandowski, her advisor, and who is running the Homeland Security social media feed, which at this point is pretty openly just Nazi. It's white supremacist. It is using a lot of neo-Nazi terms and is kind of out there on its own, but they're not even dog whistles anymore. They're announcing through words like remigration, which is an important word in the radical white supremacist world, that they have fully bought into white nationalism and the idea of recreating sort of a fascist Nazi world. So you got that going on. But then I want to take a look at the other people in the administration, because I'm going somewhere with this. Think about the people in the administration that are the headliners. So think about Kash Patel, for example, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or the FBI. He keeps screwing up again and again and again. There was a horrific shooting at Brown University this weekend that took 2 lives and wounded 9 other people physically. Many more people are wounded mentally. And that always strikes me as something we ought to be more upfront about when we think about mass shootings. People tend to sort of say, oh, there were this many people killed, which is horrific on its own. But those physical wounds will never go away, but neither will the psychic wounds for the people who were part of that shooting. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox. It just always bothers me. If you've ever lost someone to gun violence, you know it's not like, oh, well. So once again, Kash Patel jumped the starting line and announced that the FBI had gotten somebody, a person of interest, and was holding a person of interest. Well, that person, the name of that person leaked, went out over social media. Within hours, the police and the FBI had let this person go and said, oopsie poopsie, he wasn't the person we were looking for. The actual mass shooter is still at large. And now the administration, Trump, is trying to say, well, it's not our problem. That's the Brown police who should handle that, which is just, of course, ridiculous. But you've got then Kash Patel, who's once again not looking so great. Then you've got Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, who completely flubbed the Epstein files and has turned the Department of Justice into a place where Trump can exact punishment on those he perceives to be his enemies. Retribution is the wrong word. People keep using it, but retribution means you have been hurt, so you have hurt back, or you want to hurt back. In fact, the people that Trump is trying to punish didn't go out to hurt him. They were enforcing the law that he had run up against. So she has turned that, the Department of Justice, into that. But look at Linda McMahon at the Department of Education, where she's gutted it. You know, she's cut all kinds of people. That's being challenged in the courts. Look at people like Doug Burgum at the Department of the Interior, who essentially turned Interior over to an operative from Project 2025, and who now appears to be concentrating on Trump's attempt to remake Washington, D.C. Who am I forgetting here? You've got Marco Rubio, who has overturned, as Secretary of State, who has overturned 80 years of foreign policy to bring back into vogue the idea of spheres of influence, which is the system that led us into World Wars I and II. You've essentially got chaos. Basically, you've got, and a vice president, you got J.D. Vance, who's trying desperately to get his chips in order for 2028. And so is really kind of moving toward the far right young wing of the Republican Party by courting those young Republicans who are at this point Nazi adjacent. You've just got a mess on your hands. All right, so I gave you all that because the other big news today is an interview published in Vanity Fair by a journalist named Chris Whipple, who did 11 interviews with White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles over the time from immediately before the administration to just before publication, in which he talked to her at the times of what he considered to be all of the major crises so far in the administration. And what has come from that is it's a long interview. There's 2 sections of it. It's a long interview, and it portrays a White House that is chaotic. It also is worth thinking about why Wiles gave these interviews. So, one of the things that historians do is you never, ever, ever take any interview at face value. You have to think about why. The first thing is, why is somebody recording this document, this photograph, making this television show? Why are they doing it? Then you have to think about a bunch of things as well. What is the audience, and what is, when is it happening, and who is recording it? There's all sorts of things we go through, but it seems as if when a member of an administration does these long series of interviews, and the comparison that one would make is to David Stockman, who gave a series of interviews to what was at the time the Atlantic Monthly during the Reagan administration, which have been like solid gold for historians. I mean, they I've used them. I can't tell you how many times I've used them. But in this case, partly, I think, the people who were engaged in the Trump administration this time around believed, as did many of those who were trying to overthrow the government on January 6, 2021, that they were ushering in a new country. They were ushering in a new world. And they wanted to make a note of it. They wanted to keep a record of it. So, for example, on January 6, 2021, you had Lauren Boebert, who was a newly elected representative from Colorado, putting out on social media, which is still there, by the way, last time I checked. I haven't checked probably in 6 weeks, but, this is 1776. I mean, they clearly thought they were doing something new. Susie Wiles is the person who was behind hiring a lot of the people whose names I just mentioned, with the idea that they would destroy what she called the deep state, that they would create this new government. They would usher in a world that got rid of what they consider the welfare state and create this new world. So partly it seems like she wanted to keep a record, but it seems as if the way that the language in the interviews, the way it's produced, and remember, we are getting what the journalist thought was important out of these many, many hours of interviews, that she seems to be trying to distance herself and perhaps the president from the troubles of this administration. So, for example, she has very little good to say about Elon Musk, whom she blames for destroying USAID and PEPFAR, the president's attempt to halt the spread of AIDS, a great program started by George W. Bush when he was in office. She seems to blame Elon Musk for that. She suggests that she didn't have much to say about Trump's pardoning of the January 6th rioters. I'm trying to think off the top of my head what some of the other ones were. She calls the Russell voted office at the Office of Management and Budget, the guy who was instrumental in writing the Project 2025, right-wing absolute zealot. She, basically it feels like she is trying to distance herself from things. And she does admit that Trump is on a tour to hurt people, suggests that that's really on him, that she told him he could have 3 months to hurt people, and now he has pushed that further. But what's interesting about it is that after the interview came out this morning, she and many of the people around her tried to say that tried to do the same sorts of things that Trump does. Say this is the press is lying. I never said this. And of course, the guy isn't stupid. He's got the files. And he's been saying, actually, here's exactly what you said. And that's exactly what I quoted, which, by the way, is like journalism 101, that it's not like you say, oh, I think I remember this and write it down. You either have it on tape or you don't, or you have it in a document or you don't. So it's worth remembering when she gave this, that she was being disingenuous. And there's a lot of lies in it. There's a lot of things that are simply not true that the journalist wrote down. For example, she says at one point that the January 6th rioters got heavier sentences than sentencing guidelines suggested, and therefore it was fine to pardon them. In fact, they all got sentences that were below the guidelines for the crimes that they had committed. And there are a lot of things like that in there that are showing that she is trying to spin things in a way that makes at least her and perhaps the administration look better than it ought to. But what's interesting is I pulled this for you because when it came out, she gave a statement on social media. I don't remember which one. Yeah, social media. She made a statement in which she said, the article published early this morning is a disingenuously framed hit piece on me and the finest president, White House staff, and cabinet in history. And again, some people have tried to suggest that she didn't know she was being recorded, but come on, 11 interviews? This is like, again, I got nothing on that. I mean, of course she knew she's being recorded. Of course she knew it was on the record. If you don't say it's not on the record, it's on the record. She goes on to say, significant context was disregarded, and much of what I and others said about the team and the president was left out of the story. I assume after reading it that this was done to paint an overwhelmingly chaotic and negative narrative about the president and our team. Now, interestingly enough, I did read it, and I actually thought it was, typically as people are discussing it, they're pulling the pieces of it that they think are the most shocking, but it didn't seem to me to be an unfair portrait at all. And then she goes on to say, the truth is we've accomplished so much and we're the best thing since sliced bread and so on. But it's interesting that she said so much of what I said about the president was left out of the story, which suggests that he ain't happy with the story to the degree that he has heard what's in it, which is probably only what's on media. But again, the reason I am pointing to that is because I think it continues to spell out the fact that the administration, as it approaches its the end of its first year in office, is increasingly chaotic. It is increasingly out of control, and the world is starting to catch up with it. So, like, one of the things that she said, and again, take this all with a grain of salt because we don't know, that we know Trump is in the files, the Epstein files, but there's nothing, she says, there's nothing bad in it, right? And again, another place where she's disingenuous says that the image from the Epstein estate of the card with the prepubescent girl on it with something written over it and signed by Donald Trump, she says he didn't do that, which again, the Wall Street Journal journalists have, right? So who are you going to trust on that one? I'm going with the journalists. And she also went on to say that so Trump's in the files, but that Bill Clinton did not, she says, there's no evidence in those files, she says, that Bill Clinton visited Epstein's island. She says the president was wrong about that. So what you're already starting to see here, and I think you're going to see more of it, is the president trying to spin those files depending on what comes out. They're supposed to, by law, come out on the 19th. Today's the 16th, so Friday. They're supposed to be out on Friday. And you're already seeing rumors that there are memos trying to see how the Republicans can spin the Epstein files and so on. But I think you can already see this happening here. So I guess if you think about today, let me see what else there's here that you had asked about. The other thing, I'm sorry, I got to tell you, there's many more things have happened, but there is a couple of things that are of interest. There is, first of all, that House Speaker Mike Johnson has refused to bring up the House measure to extend the premium tax credits for the Affordable Care Act. And that's almost 80% of Americans want those extended. So this is a real kick in the teeth for Americans. There is also the news that the administration is going after Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, full bore now. That, again, further a sign of anger and frustration there. Job numbers out today show the economy is stagnating, that jobs are, we're at the lowest, highest unemployment rate in 4 years. And crucially here, I thought this was another thing that was revealing is, as I wrote about over the weekend, the Historic National Trust for Historic Preservation and preservation law firm has sued to stop Trump from building the ballroom that he's trying to build where the East Wing of the White House used to be. And today the White House came out and said they have to build it for national security reasons, which is really interesting for a couple of things. One, their argument is not a bad one. The argument is that there was under the East Wing the headquarters for the security for the White House, which, again, Trump would have thought of before he knocked it down. But the other reason it's interesting is because Trump is very heavily leaning into the July 2024 Supreme Court decision called Donald J. Trump v. U.S., v. United States, that says that so long as a president is operating within his official duties, that he can't be prosecuted for crimes. And one of those official duties is national security. So they gave him a lot of leeway on that. So now he is more and more saying, I have to do this because of national security. And you're seeing that with the tariffs too. You're seeing Trump saying this is about national security. Today you saw, I think it was today, maybe yesterday, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent saying we have to do tariffs for national security. That's what you're going to see again and again and again. So I'm going to leave you with this. Trump announced this evening that he is going to give a national speech tomorrow night at 9:00. And that's going to be really interesting, because you've asked me to speculate about what it's going to be. I haven't a clue, but I will say that you can think this one through a little bit. That is, you've got a man who is losing his grip on the presidency. He's losing his grip on himself, and he's losing his grip on the presidency. All of his major issues, all of them, are underwater with voters. People don't like what he's doing on the economy, what he's doing with immigration. They don't like what he's doing with Ukraine. They don't like what he's doing with the rebuilding of the different buildings in Washington, D.C. I mean, he's really not looking good on all of those issues. And certainly you've got the issue hanging out there of Venezuela. Over all of that, which, by the way, he has suggested Susie Wiles suggested is about regime change, not about drug traffickers, which we all pretty much knew, but there you go. Susie Wiles actually said it in that interview. But then over all this, you have the Epstein files coming out on Friday. And then in addition to that, you've got the fact he has egg on his face from the way he behaved yesterday over the murder of these, quite beloved American icons. What do you think he's going to say tomorrow? I mean, again, I'm not holding back that I have some secret secret here, but it strikes me that this is a man who is desperate to get the focus of attention back on himself and to try and regain the control of the narrative and to try and regain momentum. And for what it's worth, he tried to do the same thing when Hegseth called all those military officers to Washington, and everybody was like, what are they going to do? Are they going to, are they going to launch a war? What are they going to do? And basically they just harangued them and then told them all to go again. And if you look at the timing of that, you can see now why they did that at the time, because it was pretty clear that they were doing things in the Caribbean that a lot of officers had a hard time with. And were probably talking to their legal advisors to see if they could do those things. And so they called them all in and said, you got to do what we say. This is another moment where it appears that Trump needs to regain control of the narrative. And that is what he's going to be trying to do tomorrow. He could do it by making a big announcement, or he could try and fail the same way he did in October. And we'll hear more about pythons or whatever, vipers or whatever it was. By the way, I love snakes, so don't take that like I'm making fun of the snakes. I just don't think that was what was supposed to be part of the discussion in the last couple of days. So we'll see where this goes, but it's a fascinating time because these people are dangerous. They have control of the most powerful military in the world. They have control of the most powerful government in the world, and they're doing hideous things with it, both to our undocumented neighbors and increasingly to American citizens, including using facial recognition techniques to identify people and so on. But at the same time, they are deeply unpopular and they're incompetent. And which one of those is going to win out is your guess as good as mine, except I will point out once again that 252 years ago, at a time when things looked pretty damn chaotic, and it looked as if at the time the most powerful navy in the world was going to be able to take care of a ragtag bunch of settlers in only 13, after all, of the North American colonies. The other ones said no thank you. They managed to light resistance on fire. So I don't know, I just feel so strange that we're reliving all this 250 years later. But that's what the view looks like for me tonight.